The Atlanta Superspeedway track has finally been run on, the races have been completed, and there is tons and tons and tons of different opinions and things to talk about. So today I want to go over the Cup race and give a little bit of analysis on if I thought it worked or not and my personal opinions on it. So looking into the Cup race, there were a few things that I think should catch a lot of people's eyes. Number one was that yes, we did have a super speedway type race at Atlanta Motor Speedway. A 1.5 mile race now has the same kind of racing as Daytona and Talladega. And with this, we saw a lot of slingshots. There were a lot of times where guys would back up, get a big run, similar to what used to be the norm at super speedways, and then would just dive down low below somebody and then slide up ahead of them and have the lead. And for the most part, I gotta say that these were pretty good moves to see, and objectively I can say it was pretty cool to see as well with good racing. Now, there were a few things that it really kind of brought me back to, but the main one was that I think the way that there were sort of two lines all day, you never could get a third line really going that long. It really reminded me of the 2012 COT plate package. If you don't remember back then or started watching after the fact, in 2012, NASCAR tried to reduce the way that the two car tandems were kind of dominating Daytona and Talladega. And in this, the cars really weren't able to get big runs, lock up together, or just, for that matter, pack race effectively unless they had a lot of people doing two car tandems for a short amount of times. But in that, there was always one dominant lane, usually the bottom, but then the high side would start to really inch their way up before the leader of that line would go down into the lane or up into the lane, depending on where the lead pack driver was leading them, and then it would just continuously do that. And it seemed like that was happening a lot today. It was something that was relatively predictable, even if it was under the veil of unpredictability. Something that I really wasn't crazy about with this race, though, was the tire issues. Tire issues seemed to be a really big factor, and it really seemed like the leader was snake bitten at different points of the race, because every time there was someone who had the lead for a good amount of time, they'd have a flat tire and they'd either smack the wall, smack another car, start a big one or something. And it's something that Goodyear needs to get figured out, because this track is not going to get any smoother. And that really added to the problem that we saw all day of attrition. It seemed like at the middle portion of the race, it was just a complete wreck fest. Everybody was making crazy moves, there were big crashes every couple laps, and it was something that I think a lot of people inside NASCAR and SMI were probably banking on seeing. Something that really can draw the eyes of the masses. And that's probably what happened here. But in the end, William Byron outlasted them all. He didn't get any real damage in many of the crashes. He stayed up front for most of the day, made the right moves at the end, and got the win. And overall, I think that's a pretty good summary of the main parts of this race and the main things to look at. Although I will say, somebody in Fox Sports was really interested in pretty much every kid in the stands. And while I think it's cool that there's kids at the track, it got kind of weird. But there is sort of the review of what happened. I want to go over kind of my thoughts on this, what I think this race really means for NASCAR this year and maybe NASCAR in the future. And the thing that I really want to look at and stress here is that this race may have changed 1.5 milers in NASCAR and NASCAR's approach to them overall. You see, there was a record amount of lead changes for Atlanta. There was a better crowd than probably the previous 5 or 6 Atlanta races, even pre-COVID, and generally there was a positive response from all the fans on all metrics. I would say that in the short term, it would constitute as a win for NASCAR and SMI. But, and you may crucify me if you will, I'm going to say something that I don't think will be too good with many of the fans. I personally did not like this race. I really didn't like the fact that SMI and NASCAR have turned what arguably could be long-standing the best 1.5 mile NASCAR's had in the last 20 years into baby Daytona and Talladega. I didn't like the fact that long-term this could do major damage to NASCAR. Short-term, like I said, this was a win. Fans got an exciting race, an entertaining race, and a race with plenty of different wrecks. And I wouldn't be surprised, and I really, really hope that I am surprised in the other way, but I wouldn't be surprised if NASCAR elects to just do this with a bunch of mile-and-a-halves. Bring Chicagoland back, but make it a super speedway. Make Texas better as a super speedway. Las Vegas, not had the greatest races even with the next gen doing well there compared to what we want as NASCAR. So make it a super speedway. We'll get more side-by-side racing, more pack racing. Let's just have 12 super speedways. That's not the right approach to go about this. And what I'm afraid of right now is that this race might have opened Pandora's box. I personally did not like the fact that it really looked like they were just side by side, minimal passing unless somebody got a really great run or someone made a mistake. And in all honesty, it wasn't a normal super speedway race. In a normal Daytona or Talladega race, no matter the package, usually a driver has at least the ability to choose their own destiny in whatever line they have. And in my opinion, they really didn't. Once they were in a line, unless they freight trained and people joined one lane or another, they were stuck in that line a good portion of the run. In my opinion, this is a short-term and poorly thought-out attempt to get to the lowest common denominator fan, or at least casual fan, who will turn on for the NASCAR stereotype of watching just to see the wrecks. Yeah, you might get a few people to tune in for that, but at the same time, you're going to have a lot of NASCAR fans who over time just get sick of seeing the same thing over and over again. Get sick of seeing their favorite driver crashed over and over again. Yes, this might have been something that 80 to 90% of NASCAR fans really liked. But ask yourself this, is having this 6 to 12 times a year something that NASCAR fans are really going to like long term? NASCAR has made a lot of changes that I personally like. The Clash, I ended up really liking that even though I thought I wouldn't. When you have COTA, for instance, added to the schedule, Road America, all three of those changes right there, I liked. This one, I can't get behind. And you might ask, well, what about Daytona and Talladega? Do you have the same thoughts about that? And I'll be real, no. Because Daytona and Talladega Superspeedway racing initially stemmed from safety. Big crashes, putting fans at risk, was something that NASCAR couldn't do, and they had to slow the cars down at these tracks. They were marquee tracks they couldn't get rid of, but at the same time, they needed to make them safer. And for the most part, they did. You can't have a bunch of cars go unrestricted at Daytona and Talladega at this size and this aerodynamically sound, going 220 to 240 miles an hour in front of possibly over 100,000 fans like we saw at Daytona this year. Atlanta Motor Speedway, Speedway Motorsports, and NASCAR did this one strictly for entertainment. And I know that the entertainment versus racing conversation is one that not many people want to have, especially it seems like in the media industry, but it's one that needs to be had. How far is NASCAR and the tracks themselves going to go down this entertainment road before we just basically change the identity of the sport completely? They've done it with the playoffs. They've done it with stage racing. They've done it with a lot of the schedule changes, but have kept at least some of the integrity of racing for at least a few of those. NASCAR has great momentum going for it right now. The next gen showed promise at Las Vegas and at Auto Club. There was no reason, especially after we finally saw what these tracks have in store for us with this car, there was no reason to jump the gun and make this a super speedway. I, honest to God, think that NASCAR would have had a great race here even if Atlanta was repaved to the previous way it was. I think for me, the part that really hurts was watching the INDYCAR race today. You see, when I watched NASCAR, we had a giant wreck fest that might be the start of more wreck fests like this, and will be predictably unpredictable, but also be needlessly expensive when it comes to how many crashes there are. But when I look at the IndyCar race, they had a great race at Texas Motor Speedway of all places. Texas put on a great race for IndyCar. There was a debate all week about if IndyCar was going to take Texas off the schedule for Milwaukee, and now there's people saying it's earned its spot back on the schedule because it had real good racing. They didn't have to pull some dumb gimmick to make sure that people would really like the product they saw. Instead, they had straight up racing. Whereas NASCAR, even with a great car, or at least a car that's been great so far, is still with its partners pulling gimmick after gimmick when they really don't need to. So for me, this is my take. Atlanta right now has been reconfigured to the way it is. You can't change that. I can't change that. So we need to accept that this is the racing we're going to have here now. It sucks, but I don't see them tearing it up after how much hype they made about this. But at the same time, this needs to remain the only 1.5 mile super speedway. This shouldn't be something like what we saw in 2018, where we saw the All-Star race. We knew the package with that was something that was different from what we saw before. It was a good show for the 2018 All-Star race. But remember what a lot of fans said after that. They said, just once, just this one time do it. Don't put it as the normal package for points races. And you know what happened the next year in 2019? We got the 550 package. And you know what? After everyone loved that All-Star race, the majority of fans over the next 3 years that package was used hated it. They hated that package and instead wanted back to what they had before. And I'm telling you now that if NASCAR and ISC and SMI jump the gun and do this with different 1.5 miles, you're going to have a lot of people liking it at first. But before you know it, people are going to start to hate it. So please, if I can end out with anything else in this video, please just take this away. Leave this as the only 1.5 mile super speedway, or things are probably going to get bad long term. But you know what? That's my take. I know it's probably going to be a divisive one, and it's probably going to be one that isn't popular overall with the majority of fans right now. So I want to hear what you think in the comments below. Let me know. Did you like this, or do you want this to be something that is more widespread and more long-term? Let me know down in the comments below. While you're at it, leave a like in this video to support the channel, share this video to support the channel, and also subscribe to this channel as well. And to all my channel members, thank you so much for your support, whether you agree or disagree with me. And until next time, have a good one.